This is If My People Bible reading part 195. We are in the book of Luke, and we're in chapter 2, verse 22. Now, here's the huge arguments that's been going on for a long time. How do you know when Yeshua was born? So, because if you know it's September 28th, 29th, 5 BCE, and you know that he was almost 30 when he started his ministry, and he was in ministry for 18 months, not 3 years or over that, and you know how the timeline goes, because most people started at 30, 33 AD, and so forth, and they start the AD year of dominion, AD, at 0 and not at 5 BCE. And you know all this stuff that you've been told in dates and times as far as figuring out your prophecy blows it all to pieces, because now you know the truth. Well, how do we know that? Well, there's just evidence everywhere. So let's go to verse 21, chapter 2, the book of Luke. Let's just read it. Let's not go to a pastor. Don't do that. Don't pick up almost any Bible that you have that has commentary and they just copy each other. Plagiarism is incredible these days. It's just amazing. I used to do policy writing for many years, and the amount of plagiarism and the nonsense and the lying and cheating and stealing that took place with governmental money is incredible. I remember writing a grant one time, and it was $128,000, and I called the federal government, and I let them know that it was called Police Corps, and I was going to create an academy for somewhere in between, I figured 125,000, but maybe 150, because I thought I would ask for a few more things. I remember the federal government saying, well, listen, if you do that, I'll have to audit about 20 to 30 different agencies, but if you jack it up to $1 million or higher than that, I'll only have to do audits for 2 or 3 police academies or police corps. So instead of 125, make it 800 to 1.2 million. That's taxpayer dollars. That's thievery, and that's exactly what happened during the police corps of the Clinton administration. So it's gotten worse since. Having said that, you read what you read to find out what the truth is and stay away from plagiarism. Let's read it. On the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him. Who's him this time? Is it Yochanan? John? No, it's Yeshua. They're following Torah. They're waiting for the 8th day. That's when vitamin K starts coagulating, so you don't have a bleeding problem when the little boy gets circumcised. He was named Yeshua. Yours may say Jesus. He was not named son of Zeus. The name the messenger had given him before he had been conceived. Next sentence, verse 22. When the time of their purification, according to the law of Moses, had been completed, Joseph and Mariam took him, Yeshua, to Jerusalem to present him to Yahweh. 23. As it is written in the Torah of Yahweh, every firstborn male is to be consecrated to Yahweh. Exodus 13:2, isn't it? And to offer sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the Torah of Yahweh, a pair of doves and 2 young pigeons. And now there was a man of Jerusalem called Simeon, and it has a story about that. That's for your reading. Let's just read it. I'm not going to sit there and read it for you. Here's the important part of how you can apply this to today. she had to go through a purification process. So they were in Bethlehem. Who came to visit them? The wise man and all this? No, the shepherds, because that's all that was said. And read the rest of the Gospels. Read them. There was only one birth in Bethlehem, not four. There was one. When you put them all together, and you go through what Luke is, I mentioned about Luke being very detailed more than the other ones because he's a doctor and he's a physician. He's going to show off of his skills. He has a gift that he's been given by Yahweh, and he's showing it. So we simply take what Luke says and apply it. So he was born in a Sukkot, a place where animals stay. There was no room at the inn and all these other things. I don't have a problem with that. And what's important is that she needs to suck the child. The child needs to suck. And so that process starts. 8 days later, she's capable of moving. So they go through the purification process, and that's in 40 days. And he's presented at the temple. So he's circumcised on the 8th day. She was able to go. Now, how far she would go, whether she would stop, that has something to do with being unclean. So she waits till she's clean. That's 40 days. Now, from there, they go from Bethlehem, and it's not that far, straight north up Jerusalem to the temple. Presentations made, laying down the pigeons, and guess what? So they went back to Bethlehem, and they waited for the wise men to go truckling across all the way of the desert of Arabah from Iraq and other places in the Far East. People that watch the stars. You got to remember, Daniel stayed in Babylon. He never returned. So that training camp that went on there had everything to do with Daniel and his friends that stayed. And these other people from other nations learned all about what David taught them. He was that smart. So where would they go? Now, the counting was over with. The census was taken. They went through the ritual, the process, the whole thing you got to do for the yearly and for the meeting and the counting of the family from Bethlehem. They went home. Where's home? At this time, it's Nazareth. Later on, it's Capernaum when Joseph evidently is not around. It's Capernaum is the home. But right now at this time, it's Nazareth. So they go home to Nazareth. So now when you read about the wise people, the wise guys, the magi coming, they travel from the east to the west, and they end up, if you look at the way, the king's traveling highways, you just don't go anywhere in the desert. You follow the routes. Just like if you take Highway 70 or 80 or Highway 95, you just can't go and you just can't drive. You don't have a four-wheel drive vehicle. You follow the highways. They follow the highways and they end up going to the leadership. That's what leadership does. Leadership goes to leadership. And then when they left, they continued to follow the sign in the sky. Well, the sign in the sky didn't point south. It pointed west. That's Virgo. That's 5 BCE. That's all lined up in the Mazzaroth. It's not a shooting star. It's not Halley's Comet. It's not all these stories you hear from pulpits and books and fairy tales. They followed the science, and they went to Nazareth. And then they were warned not to go back from whence they came. So they went through the northern king's route back to the east. They went back east to Iraq and Persia and so forth. They went east. And of course they weren't caught because the soldiers of Herod were looking in the south and the south highways. Pretty smart, huh? And being warned, Yeshua, his mother and dad, went to Egypt, and they had plenty of gold to take care of them for a few years until Herod died. And then they were told to come back. So there's where the gold went. Well, what about the frankincense and myrrh? Well, that's all about his burial, too. His burial was the frankincense and myrrh. And if you remember, and as you'll read later on, with the death of Yeshua, it takes about 100 pounds of spice myrrh for burial purposes, about 100 pounds. Yeshua probably weighed somewhere around 130 to 150 pounds. It takes about 100 pounds of that to encapsulate him. Interesting. So, does that help you? You go to Google sites and you look at YouTube sites and you look at books and stuff and magazines and trying to figure this out and follow other people, and you're going to get caught and lost and never figure it out. But when you get to verse, it's still in chapter 2, verse 39, when Joseph and Mariam had done everything required by the law, Torah, of Yahweh, they returned to Galilee to their own town of Nazareth. So there they went back, right? Wow. I wanted to give you that. It was 40 years. I was 40 years old before I figured it out and had the help of a couple wonderful people. Robert Van Campen was one of them, by the way. He passed away, I think, in 96, 97. I think his daughter still takes care of everything. And I think all the Bibles, he loved to collect Bibles. Oh my goodness, he would spend millions and millions on one Bible. And he had a whole bunch of Bibles. And things one way or another, I'll just leave it at that. But because of certain things that happened at the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, all those Bibles ended up at the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. Now you got to pay to see this. Back when he was alive and so forth and had more control, it wasn't that expensive to go there and have a wonderful day at the Holy Land Experience in Orlando, which was a fake Jerusalem and the whole thing, but whatever. Now you have to go through this it's all the Bibles that are antiquities and expensive are maintained and controlled by very rich people. That's okay. After all this real great detail is in the book of Luke, we now go to chapter 6, and we always start the Torah. You ready? And we'll do a couple minutes, and that'll be the 15 minutes today that we spent together. Verse 23, rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven, for that is how their fathers treated the prophets. So this happened on the chapter 6, and it happened on the second high Shabbat. Yeshua was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick up some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Notice that it uses the word high Shabbat, because during the Passover, as we explain later on, Yeshua did not die on a Friday and buried before Friday night and get raised less than in about 24 hours later, 26, 27 hours later, on a Sunday morning when sunrise service. He was crucified before High Shabbat that particular year, like 26, 27 A.D. And be 30 A.D. Before 30 A.D. He was crucified, and he had a High Shabbat, which was Passover, on a Wednesday, and then our Friday was regular Shabbat. So that's why the women couldn't come and anoint him and be with him and wrap him up and so forth until early Sunday morning. And he rose Saturday night before the sun rose on a Sunday morning. We'll get to that. It's all right here. But we're going to get in the Torah next time, and we'll start at verse 27 in chapter 6. All right. I've given you something to look up and pray on it. Check everything I say.